Conversation with the Candidate continues.
Welcome back to our conversation with the candidate and our candidate this evening, Tom Steyer. We have our town hall of New Hampshire voters here with plenty of questions. We're going to jump right into it, Mr. Steyer, starting with Elizabeth Radisich.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for being here tonight, Mr. Steyer.
Elizabeth, call me Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Everybody does. Thank you.
So, Tom, before we started taping, we were talking about the debates that we've been seeing the past couple of nights. And obviously, you weren't there with them because you got into the race late. Besides a whole lot of wealth, what do you think that you can offer to American voters that the other 20 some odd candidates that we've been seeing, mostly with a whole lot more government experience, what can you offer that they can't?
So that's a great question. That's really fair. The biggest issue that I see in the United States is that we have a broken federal government. That basically corporations have performed a hostile corporate takeover of the government in DC through their cash. And that what we need to do to get any of those policies, prescriptions that people are talking about in the debates, like healthcare, redo, like a Green New Deal, like education, is we first need to break the stranglehold that the corporations have on our democracy and return the government to the people, of, by, and for the people. And for the last 10 years, as an outsider, I've been organizing coalitions around the country of ordinary citizens to take on unchecked corporate power. So I started doing that 10 years ago in my home state of California, taking on oil companies directly on the ballot as they tried to repeal the most progressive energy and climate laws in the world. No one thought they could be beaten. We actually beat them and got 70% of the vote by going directly to the people and talking about what people needed with regards to energy in terms of clean air, clean water, and jobs. And since then, I've taken on the tobacco companies directly on the ballot, who'd won 17 times in a row. We got 60% of the votes by going, again, directly to the people, not to the legislature. We've taken on the drug companies. We've done direct democracy around the country, beating people on a state level. I also started the largest grassroots organization in the United States, Next Gen America. We've actually been in New Hampshire, just so you know, since the beginning of 2014. We're on 18 college campuses in New Hampshire. In 2018, we chose 38 Republican districts in the House. We organized around young people, and we changed the turnout of people under 30 from the previous midterm at 18% participation, less than 1 out of 5 people under 30 were voting, to 41%. More than doubled it. That's the largest generation in America, bigger than the boomers, was voting at half the rate of other Americans, and that's not a democracy. So my answer to your question is, as an outsider, I have been taking on corporate power across this country and beating them for 10 years. If you believe that these corporations run our government, and they do, then we're not getting any of those things people are talking about in the debates unless we break that power. And I've done it for 10 years successfully. I've done it as an outsider. When I started Need to Impeach, the Democratic leadership was mad as hell at me. But I was telling the truth, and I was standing up for the American people in an obvious way when nobody else would do it. So you ask me, what do you want to do? Why I should do this? Because I'm the person who for 10 years has gone and tried to push the power to the American people against the corporations. And that's what I'm here to do. That's what we have to do if we're going to get health care. That's what we're going to have to do if we're going to get the Green New Deal. We're going to have to take the power back for the people. And that's what I believe in. The American people are the smartest group in the world. If you leave it up to us, we'll get the best possible answer. If you leave it up to the corporations, they'll get the best possible answer for them. And that's not what we want.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth. The next question comes from Leanne Kluger.
Welcome.
Leanne.
What steps will you take to resolve the humanitarian crisis at our nation's border?
So let me just start by telling you a quick story about how I see this. One of the people who I work with is an organizer in energy on an environmental justice basis. Her name is Vien Trong. She's a really outstanding person. And she's married to a child psychologist. And he was listening to a discussion of what's going on at the border, and they had in the background some of the children who'd been separated from their parents crying. And he started to cry. And Vien said, you know, what's so upsetting? Obviously, he cares about kids. He's a child psychologist. He said, I know the difference between a child who's crying because he or she is hungry, or he or she is tired, or he or she is undergoing torture. And I know that these children are undergoing something so painful that they will live with it for the rest of their lives. So when we talk about what's going on the border, and we talk about the inhumanity that this government is doing in our name, it's absolutely unforgivable in my mind as an American. People who come to the border fleeing violence have legal rights internationally that we've agreed to. We have an obligation to treat them humanely and with respect. We have to stop this right now. I mean, one of the things you guys may know about me is that my dad was a lawyer who interrupted his law practice to go in the Navy in World War II and prosecuted the Nazis at Nuremberg. So when you think about what the United States traditionally stands for, we stand for moral leadership in the world. Oh, we always have. That's always been the point of this country. I mean, we started out being for freedom and justice. So I would stop this. I mean, it's ridiculous. Anyone in this room would stop this on day one. This is not what America stands for. And this is not the kind of thing that leads to success around the world. The way that we will succeed around the world is by having people realize we're trustworthy, decent, straightforward, and a good partner. That's how you build value in the world, by people understanding that they can trust you to do the right thing so they don't have to attack you. I would say, no one has ever built something beautiful in a fist fight. And that's what this president does. He starts a fist fight on the assumption that if he punches you in the face, that will be the end of it, and it never is. So when you see him do this kind of inhumane thing for political purposes, you know, it's going to be something that we're going to have to react to show that we're the opposite on day one. There are going to be so many things from a value standpoint that we're going to have to show about what America really is. And look, I've done 50 of these town halls. I've gone to 35 states, including deep red states. Americans are fantastic. Totally fantastic. Very brave, very compassionate. This president obviously is leading us in the wrong way. We have lost our way as a country. And a big part of what we need to do, this is a perfect example of how we need to change to reassert who we are, what America means, and so we can build something together that reflects our values and a future that we can create that we're really proud of. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, Leanne. Next question comes from Nancy Keene.
Hi. Thank you for being here to talk to us.
What a treat.
Appreciate it.
I love this stuff.
Oh, well, we'll see if you love this one.
Okay. I sense a zinger in my future.
I'm talking about the future. Actually, I'm asking a question about Social Security benefits.
Okay.
I keep hearing, 25 years it's going to be bankrupt, maybe 2034 it will be bankrupt. What would you do to ensure that we still continue to get our Social Security benefits that we've put into all of our careers?
So, let me say this. I did spend 30 years in the private sector. I am very used to the idea that you have to look forward and budget for the future the way every family in the United States has to look forward and budget for the future. And if you look at Social Security, the numbers are straightforward because you can make estimates of how long people are going to live. You can make estimates for how much money is going to come into the system. And you can see the flows. For years, way more money came into the Social Security system than went out. And that's turning around as people like me get older. The baby boomers get older. People start taking Social Security benefits that they've paid in through the years. This is not something we should be messing around with. The government has got to say, we're going to guarantee this system. Look, there's no question. The government should be budgeting looking forward, just the way all of us have to budget looking forward, including budgeting Social Security. You know, I remember saying to my mom, so my mom was a journalist, and then she was a teacher in the New York public schools and in the Brooklyn House of Detention. And she spent her whole life basically trying to do the right thing. She thought of journalism as basically a calling, like being a priest, like making sure the American people knew the truth. And she was one of the least money-oriented people in the whole world. She really didn't care about it. She really cared about what she believed was right. And I once talked to her about Social Security and about her Social Security money, because she'd been a working person her whole life. And she said, Tom, that is my money. Don't you take that from me. I was like, okay, Mama. And that's how Americans feel. I have been paying into this system for my whole life. I have been budgeting my life so that I could retire and, take care of myself and be independent. Don't touch my money. That's how people feel. They have a right to feel that way, and the government should be doing its budgeting to make sure that we live up to our promises. That's my answer.
Thank you, Nancy. The next question comes from Mary Kirstein.
Hi, thank you for being here. So I appreciate you really focusing on reaching out directly to the American public. I have a little experience with NextGen when I was at UNH last year. I swear you couldn't walk 10 feet without encountering one of their tables. And
we are all over the campuses in New Hampshire.
Yes, and now that you're running for president, even my 9-year-old knows who you are because of all of your ads on YouTube videos, right? And at the end of the week, we get a stack like this of all of your literature that comes in the mail. But it's really important to reach out directly to the people and to make sure the power goes back to the people and not the corporations. So bearing that in mind, what are your plans for the future of clean energy to make sure that power doesn't go back to the corporations and stays with the people?
So I have been a really active energy and climate hawk for more than a decade. And I put out a climate plan last Thursday. And here are the 3 elements that I think are different. And let me say this about all the climate plans. Unless they go into effect, they don't matter. And that's the point I've been trying to make in this election, which is talking about policies that you have no ability to pass in the real world is interesting intellectually, but what I'm trying to talk about is what will actually happen in the real world. So I want to talk about that in this context. Number 1, if I'm president, I will declare an emergency on day 1, a climate emergency. I will give the Congress 100 days to pass some form of Green New Deal, and if they don't, I will use the emergency powers of the presidency, because that's the timing. We're in a crisis. We actually have to act fast, in fact, immediately. And if we don't act, if we wait, we miss the window, period, the end. If it's a crisis, act like it's a crisis. Second of all, in answer to your question, my plan is based on the idea of environmental justice, of going directly to communities to ask them how they want this to be implemented. And in particular in the United States, if you look at who has polluted air, who has polluted water, who's getting sick, who's dying, it's low-income communities and communities of color, because they don't have the political power to stop it. And I know in my home state of California, if you look at, we have over 3 million people with asthma. You can see exactly which communities have all the asthma. And that's exactly who it is. The second thing I'd say about communities is this. In my plan, we set aside $50 billion for displaced workers in the industries, in the fossil fuel industries. We should not solve this on the back of working people who are doing jobs and have dedicated their lives to taking care of their families. It's not their fault, but we should hold them harmless. That's the second thing. And the last thing is this. If we're going to solve this problem, we're going to do it on a global basis. If you look at what the United States can do on its own, we're very significant, but we cannot control this. This is a classic example of the 21st century where the problems in the United States do not start inside the borders or end inside the borders. If you think about immigration, it's also migration. There are issues in other countries that dramatically affect people coming to our borders. In terms of climate, energy, pollution, this is a global issue. I'll just give you some quick stats to put that in context. We have 86 coal plants in the United States, total. Just one part of China's industrial plan is called the Belt and Road. It's about them expanding their industrial might into Southeast Asia and Africa. As part of the Belt and Road proposal, they're proposing to build 350 coal plants. That's just one thing. Turkey is planning to build 93 coal plants. So when you put the United States in the context of the world, if we're going to solve this problem, we're going to have to reassert American leadership in the world. We're going to have to go back to be the people we've always thought we were and were, which is moral and intellectual leaders in the world, technological leaders in the world, and business leaders in the world. So when we think about how are we going to bring this kind of solution in the real world, in the time we need to do it, every time I hear people talk about their climate plans, my answer is, okay, but there's some realities in this world that plan doesn't deal with. The timing of the natural world. I always say, Mother Nature is not giving us an extension because we tried hard and we needed a couple more years to debate. Mother Nature is going to do what she's going to do. She is going to control the timing, and we are part of a world, and those are just facts. And unless you're dealing with those facts, you're not actually dealing with the problem. You're talking about it, but you're not dealing with it. And that's why I'm running for president. Because it's time for us to stop talking about magical solutions and start talking about what we're actually going to do in the real world that we have to do. I've got 4 kids. I feel my responsibilities as an American, but as a human being for my kids and everybody's grandkids, and everybody unborn. If we're going to move on with pride, we're going to do the right thing. And that's what I'm talking about doing, together. And we're going to enjoy it. We can do it. I'm a business person. I've looked at this stuff. We'll be richer, better employed, better paid, and healthier if we do it. But we can't be scared. We're going to have to meet some challenges and do them, and that's what Americans do too. Let's name the challenge, let's meet the challenge, and let's have a beer afterwards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. We've got about a minute left, Mr. Steyer. One quick question for you. Your home state, California, is going to require presidential candidates to release their tax returns.
I don't know why they thought that one up.
You're okay with releasing your own tax returns?
Yes, I am.
Everything's good in there?
Yes.
And why is that? Why are you okay with that? Laying that out there.
Because I have nothing to hide, Adam.
Then you think the president does?
I don't think there's any question. Listen, when someone explains to you over 5 years with differing explanations, all of them obviously false, about why they're doing something, you realize they have something to hide. You know, as a parent, if your kid just keeps changing his or her story about where their homework is or why it isn't done, yeah, they have something to hide. They didn't do their homework. Here, this guy has something to hide. We're not sure what it is, but he darn well doesn't want to tell the truth about this. And he's fought for years to prevent it. But what we know about him is he's a fake. I mean, I was watching him, the negotiations with China break apart. This guy's supposed to be the deal maker. He's 0 for 3 years in deals. He's a deal talker. He's not a deal maker. He's a guy who doesn't have any relationship with anyone.
And we'll continue this conversation, Mr. Steyer, online and on our mobile app. On television, we do want to have you join us next week when Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard will be here. But again, the half hour is up. Please do join us on our mobile app or online where we will continue this conversation with Tom Steyer. Have a good evening.
This is so fun.